Welcome everyone to the 2021 Climate Leadership Series. I'm Amy Holm, Executive Director of the Climate Registry.
And I'm Nat Cohen, President of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. C2ES, in partnership with the Climate Registry, co-hosts the annual Climate Leadership Awards and Conference, and we're thrilled to host this virtual conference and series. Thank you for joining us today. This year kicked off with great climate ambition. We've welcomed a new administration that sees the importance of transformative climate action, and we've seen the international community deepen its climate commitments. A motivated private sector is also moving in step in this direction, setting and advancing net zero and carbon neutrality targets across sectors. These commitments will be incredibly important as world leaders meet in Glasgow in a few weeks for COP26. But beyond these commitments, we must have action. The recently released sixth assessment report of the IPCC was a sobering reminder that limiting warming to 1.5 or even 2 degrees Celsius is critical. This will not be easy, and meeting the challenge will require global leadership, as well as ambition at the federal, state, and local levels. The actions we take or fail to take now and in the coming decade to cut climate pollution and build greater resilience to the climate change that is already irreversible will reverberate for generations. That's why our theme for 2021 is ambition to action, mobilizing for a decade of decarbonization. We're thrilled to have the support of our 2021 sponsors. A special thank you to our headline sponsor, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and to our host city sponsor, Entergy, whom you will hear from later on in the program.
Thanks, Nat. And thanks to the generous support of our 2021 sponsors, we are able to offer complimentary registration to this Climate Leadership Series. We encourage you to share this event with your colleagues and networks. With over 800 attendees from all over the world, we welcome new friends, and we are happy to see many familiar faces that we know are joining us today. And although we're really missing running into you and are in our famed CLC exhibit hall, we do encourage you to visit our virtual exhibit hall and sponsor booth to learn more about the great organizations that are supporting this event and demonstrating their own ambitious climate leadership. Another in-person tradition that we're missing this year is celebrating together at our Climate Leadership Awards ceremony and dinner. However, we will still be recognizing our esteemed group of 2021 Climate Leadership Award winners tomorrow during the virtual awards showcase, which is included in your registration. So I hope you tune into that event as well. We're also excited to announce that following this 3-day event, we'll be hosting additional CLC webinars and workshops throughout the fall. Now, just a few housekeeping tips. To connect with your colleagues, I encourage you to use the chat function to the right of your screen. If you do need assistance during this event, please email questions@climateleadershipconference.org. Today's session will be recorded and the recordings will be made available on the Hopin platform in the coming days. I hope that you find today's events engaging and inspiring. And let's get started with the program. We're happy to kick off remarks from Antha Williams, Environment Lead for Bloomberg Philanthropies.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you today at the annual Climate Leadership Conference hosted by the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions and the Climate Registry. I'm Antha Williams, and I lead the Environment Program at Bloomberg Philanthropies. It's inspiring to see so many of you across different sectors, from business and government to academia and nonprofits, take bold action to protect our climate. The scale of this challenge is unprecedented, and it's going to take all of us working together to ensure we avoid the worst impacts of climate change and build a more sustainable world from the ground up. At Bloomberg, we're proud to work with so many of you to tackle the climate crisis from all angles and to support today's conference. As founder of Bloomberg LP, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and as 3-term mayor of New York City, Mike Bloomberg knows firsthand the importance of taking a whole-of-society approach to fighting the climate crisis. When Mike was mayor, he launched Plan YC, an ambitious plan for a greater New York and a greener New York that included extensive on-the-ground community engagement. That plan has since become a case study on how city-led action can improve air quality and advance city climate goals. Working together is key to meeting and exceeding our climate targets. Our core belief in a bottom-up, all-hands-on-deck approach, the same approach you all contribute to every day, helps guide the work across our environment program. I'd like to share a few examples with you today. In the United States and around the world, we've taken on coal, making historic progress in shutting down coal plants and transitioning to clean energy by partnering with local grassroots organizations, local activists, and litigators. Here in the US, we've retired over 65% of coal in a decade, and our momentum is only growing. Our national success has spurred sister campaigns in Europe, Australia, Japan, and South Korea, where coalitions are working to eliminate coal and bring about a just transition for impacted communities. Because of our global dependence on fossil fuels like coal, air pollution has become one of the leading public health concerns we face worldwide, which is why we also support efforts to improve air quality and combat the public health impacts associated with breathing dirty air. We work with local organizations, city leaders, and community partners around the globe, including in places like Brussels, London, Paris, and Jakarta, to improve their air quality. Our programs are working to implement innovative air quality monitoring programs that give cities the data they need to enact meaningful air quality policies, while also empowering community members with tools and educational resources to take action that protects their health. In so much of our work at Bloomberg, this bottom-up approach is vital in driving our strategy and ensuring high-impact, long-lasting progress. At global climate negotiations like COP26 in Glasgow, the focus is all about national leaders cooperating to set goals and standards for their future. But national governments can't meet their climate commitments without meaningful engagement from cities, regions, businesses, investors, and other local groups. To bridge that gap, Mike supports initiatives like America is All In and the UN's Race to Zero and Race to Resilience campaigns to help various levels of society commit to and reach ambitious climate goals. This need for collaborative transformation is precisely why we believe that America is All In, the most expansive coalition of cross-sector US leaders ever assembled in support of climate action, has a critical role to play in implementing the US climate target. In the lead up to COP26, we've already seen enormous momentum on the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience campaigns, with more than 800 cities and 4,000 businesses now part of the coalition committed to net zero and taking action to decarbonize our economy. Events like this are so important because we need to engage more actors across a variety of geographies, and we need to ensure that they have the capacity and support necessary to implement their ambitious commitments. The more we can implement this whole of society approach here in the United States, the more we can encourage other countries to do the same. By working with all levels of society, from the individual all the way up to national and international leaders, we can make meaningful progress in the climate crisis and rebuild a healthy, sustainable economy with good-paying green jobs. Thank you again for having me today and for all you do to inspire collaborative, transformative climate action. And now I'd like to pass it over to Wendy Jaglom from RMI to say more about America is All In. Hi, everyone.
Thanks so much, Antha, and thank you to Nat, Amy, and the rest of the conference organizing team for bringing us all together once again for this great convening, and for inviting me to speak with you all today. I'm here today representing America is All In. Antha just gave us a great overview of the importance of a whole of society approach, the critical role for non-federal leaders like many of you joining us today, and the continued importance of bottom-up leadership to address the climate crisis. I'd love to share with you all just a little more about what America is All In is doing to advance a whole of society approach to climate action. As Antha mentioned, America is All In is the most expansive coalition of US non-federal leaders committed to addressing the climate crisis, including over 5,000 representatives of subnational government, the private sector, and civil society institutions. This includes city, county, state, and tribal governments, businesses and investors, and institutions of faith, culture, health, and education. America is All In represents the broader US non-federal climate movement, a movement that accounts for 2/3 of the US population, over 70% of the US economy, and over half of US emissions. Over the past decade, we've seen the powerful ability of these non-federal leaders to drive national climate ambition and progress. From the vehicle emission standards a decade ago to last year's HFC legislation, we've seen time and time again the ability for non-federal leaders to spur major nationwide emissions reductions. And this leadership continued even under a disengaged and often antagonistic federal administration. In 3 short years under the last administration, the number of electric vehicles on the road doubled, the number of cities committed to 100% renewable electricity quintupled, and communities across the country committed to all electric new building construction, to name just a few examples of progress. Now that we have a re-engaged administration, America is All In aims to mobilize a whole of society approach to climate action that combines this non-federal momentum with federal action and ambition. This mobilization includes scaling up and accelerating local climate action across the country, both through direct actions taken within the jurisdiction of our diverse coalition signatories and their peers, as well as by coming together to advocate for favorable state and local climate policies. It includes advancing an all-of-society approach to climate action, not just here in the United States, but around the globe. We hope to elevate the role of non-federal leaders on the international stage to encourage countries around the world to pursue a whole-of-society approach to climate action, while also continuing to boost the credibility of US climate action by showing the world the steadfast, non-federal commitment to climate progress. Finally, the All In mobilization includes both partnering with and pushing the federal government to advance a national climate strategy that reflects this whole of society approach. It is fantastic to have a federal administration that is re-engaged on climate and leading the way on this critically important issue, even bringing the full weight of the federal government through its whole of government approach to climate action. But we know that federal action alone is not enough to get us where we need to go. We need all levels of government and all parts of society working together to move at the speed and scale needed. In that vein, we need federal policies and investments that support ambitious non-federal climate action. And we need non-federal leaders, like all of you, continuing to push ambition and set the bar for even more ambitious federal action. We are at a truly critical time for climate action. We are seeing and experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change all around us, from deadly heat, drought, and wildfires in the West to deadly storms and flooding in the East. And the IPCC report shows us that these impacts are only going to get worse, and that our opportunity to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is quickly narrowing. As we approach COP26 in Glasgow, we need to show both our commitment and our plan to achieve ambitious emissions reductions. Over the next few days, you will be hearing from and about a wide range of climate leadership. On Friday, I encourage you to join my colleagues for a panel session discussing our latest America is All In report called Blueprint 2030, which outlines the breakthrough policies and actions needed from each part of society, from federal and subnational government, companies, and civil society institutions, to give us the best chance of achieving our 2030 and 2050 emissions reductions goals. And then I encourage you all to go all in on climate action by taking action within your own institutions to advance climate solutions, by partnering with your peers across sectors and geographies to accelerate innovative solutions, and by calling on your local, state, and federal representatives to advance robust, climate-friendly policies and investments. Now is the moment. Let's go all in together to tackle the climate crisis and advance a healthy, prosperous, equitable, and sustainable future. Thank you.
Great and inspiring work that America is All In is doing to broaden the tent for climate leadership at all levels of government and all across society. There are more and more places across the country that are being affected already by the impacts of climate change. And one state that is intimately familiar with these hazards is Louisiana. The state has set out its forward-looking approach to building resilience to climate change and pursuing prosperity in a low-carbon economy. To share more about the state's approach to climate change, we're pleased to have Governor John Bel Edwards. Governor Edwards was sworn in as the 56th governor of Louisiana in January 2016 and started his second term last year. Governor Edwards' remarks will set us up for a great discussion of resilience leaders who are addressing climate impacts in very different parts of the country. Wade Crowfoot, the Secretary for Natural Resources in California, and Charles Sutcliffe, the Chief Resilience Officer for Louisiana. Wade and Charles will be joined by Susie Toriente as moderator. But before we get to that discussion, I'm pleased to turn it over to Governor Edwards.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conference. As you all know, aside from Louisiana's amazing people, awesome food, and unique culture, our state is probably ground zero for climate impacts. That's why we are positioning ourselves as a global leader in coastal climate adaptation. Throughout this conference, please keep focused on the very real experiences of communities suffering because of extreme weather events that are becoming more extreme and more frequent due to global climate change. On August 29th, Louisiana was hit by Hurricane Ida, a very strong Category 4 storm that was among the strongest in our state's history. With temperatures in the 90s and humidities near 100%, more than 1 million homes and businesses were without power, and thousands had to live in shelters. There were 30 storm-related deaths, of which most were due to the heat and to carbon monoxide poisoning from generators that were improperly used as people tried to stay cool. Within the last year alone, Louisiana has been hit by 4 major storms: Hurricanes Delta, Laura, Zeta, and then Ida this year. Since taking office in 2016, I have visited more victims of natural disasters than I ever thought possible, and I've gone to the federal government 23 times for emergency disaster declarations. That's excluding the COVID-19 pandemic, which has also taken a tremendous toll on our citizens. But Louisiana is doing far more than seeking federal assistance. We have also built one of the most ambitious and accomplished pre-disaster coastal adaptation programs in the country. Guided by a science-based process that balances the needs of short-term and long-term sustainability, Louisiana is building more protection and restoration projects than anyone. Since taking office, we've invested more than $15 billion in construction projects benefiting nearly 32,000 acres of wetlands and 359 miles of levees. We hope to break ground soon on the nearly $2 billion Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project that will restore the environment, sequester carbon, combat sea level rise, provide natural storm surge protection, and support nearly 2,000 construction jobs. But Louisiana also knows that we cannot build our way out of this climate crisis. We must also reduce greenhouse gas emissions contributing to global warming. To balance the interests of climate policy and the economy, I've called together a diverse group of stakeholders to build our policies in a way that is rooted in science and in transparency. Among the pillars of our plan are solar and wind, industrial electrification, green hydrogen, blue carbon, climate equity, and forming partnerships across government, academia, and the private sector. Our imperatives share one common denominator: our commitment to our people and to our future. So as you are all gearing up for COP26, I encourage you to think seriously about how you can put these commitments into action for the benefit of real people like those right here in Louisiana. If done right, adapting to climate change and addressing the root causes of climate change can be vehicles to transform our communities and our economies. Hopefully, I can join you next time in person. Until then, thank you for your work, and God bless.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor, for that interesting words that you shared with us this afternoon. I'd like to stay in Louisiana for a little bit and start our conversation with Charles, the state's CRO. Hi, Charles.
Hey, Susie. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of this conference today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Charles, I was thinking that when I was in your shoes as a CRO in Miami Beach for 4 years, now in my work, I do city resilience across the globe at Jacobs. I used to say that the process for building resilience was really the same, right? But it was really the uniqueness that comes from the local flavor, right? It comes from location, culture, history, and all those things. And I was wondering if you could share kind of from your perspective, what are those shocks and stresses that, that your state needs to deal with? And what are the top priorities that you and the governor are working on?
Sure. Thanks, Susie. So, the governor touched on a lot of it in his introduction video. I mean, obviously, we've got hurricanes in Louisiana, and people are still really hurting and in recovery mode right now. So, as difficult it is to battle Mother Nature, we do have a good plan in place for how to at least wrap our heads around and wrap our arms around what's driving the problem and what the potential solutions are. So the governor referred to our coastal master plan, which is really driving success there. So I think that's pretty good. At least understanding what we need to do. Getting it all done and funding it all is another issue entirely. But I think the second big issue that we have is just more statewide flooding, whether it's from rainfall events or riverine events. We have just a lot of water in Louisiana. It doesn't all come from hurricanes. And so we're really accelerating our efforts there. We were hit by torrential floods in 2016. And from there, we've kind of built out a whole new system of gauges and monitors. And we're building models from that to kind of, again, prioritize projects and try to address that comprehensively. But I think kind of the next most pressing issue that we have to figure out is going to be heat. And the governor referred to that, kind of in aftermath of a hurricane, when you don't have electricity to turn the air conditioner on. But we know we're going to see more hot days all over across our state in the future. And that's something that we don't really have a comprehensive plan for yet. That we don't have large scale projects to try to implement that can, reduce that vulnerability for tons of people at a time. And so I think that's a big issue that we need to kind of work on in the future. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Very similar to the issues that we face here in Florida. Definitely no surprise. But let's jump over to Wade for a few minutes. And nice to see you, Wade. And thanks for joining us. Let's maybe compare and contrast a little bit about, what does California see? What are your climate threats and your shocks and stresses that you're prioritizing?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, great to be here. And Charles, thanks for your leadership. And Susie, in the Southeast. We, of course, have a much different climate out west, where we have, thanks to climate change, less water than we would normally have, and hotter, drier conditions. The way I think about it is, we've always had these extreme events, whether they're big storms on the eastern seaboard or hurricanes in the Gulf or wildfire and droughts in California. Climate change supercharges those events. So in California right now, as you know, we face worsening wildfire seasons. Warming winter temperatures and warmer spring and summer temperatures mean that more of our forests and our wildlands are drier to begin with a lot of tree mortality, dead trees. And then in the spring and the summer, we have small fires becoming much larger, hotter fires as a result of those warming temperatures. This year in California, we had 2 catastrophic fires that did something that had never been done before in California, which is they were burning so large and so hot, they crested our Sierra Nevada mountain range, which had never happened before, and went to the eastern side. We know the wildfire crisis is worsening as a result of climate change. We're also dealing, like Louisiana, with extreme temperatures. In California, we lived through our hottest June on record, followed by our hottest July on record, followed by our hottest August on record. And that means temperatures above 120 degrees in parts of the state. So think about being a vulnerable senior in an apartment without air conditioning, living through that extended heat wave. We are experiencing heat domes across the entire Southwest that are stressing our grid and creating reliability challenges. And then, of course, the worsening drought. Drought and flooding are part of our natural ecological cycles in California. But again, those warming temperatures means less snow in the winter and more rain that flows out of our system. And then that snowpack that we've relied on for 100 years to form the basis of our water supply is increasingly absorbing into very dry soils or evaporating as a result of record spring and summer temperatures. So we're in the second year of our drought, and we're already experiencing conditions that are akin to something like a fourth or fifth year of a drought just 20 years ago. So those are some of the challenges we face.
Thank you, Wade. And we definitely see that on the news all the time. And, we feel it, even if we can't be there and see it. So I understand what you're saying. I'd like to maybe now shift gears. We've outlined the issues. What are the policies, projects, and technologies you're putting in place to address these? And I always like to start with policy, because I think that's how you institutionalize change, not just one project at a time or maybe a tool or technology. So could you maybe outline some of that you're doing? Wade, I'll start with you, and then we'll go back to Louisiana.
Sure. I mean, climate change requires a paradigm shift in the way that we manage our communities and natural resources. And by that, it means really stepping back and understanding this is not a matter of simply responding to an acute one-time challenge. We have to change our system. So in this case, our water systems for providing enough water for our communities and economy and taking care of our fish and wildlife, and our forests and our landscapes against the impacts of wildfire. So in both cases, we have big, broad, very specific strategies or action plans, as we call them, that identify the actions that actually we need to take to make ourselves more drought resilient and more wildfire resilient. This includes actions like ensuring that we can store more water in our groundwater basins when we have these heavy winter floods for times of drought to be able to use. That's been a strategy that's been underutilized in the past. And given this swinging pendulum and extreme water events, we know we need to capture more of our winter flows and put them into groundwater basins and even reservoirs for use during droughts. On the wildfire side, it's actions like investing much more funding in defensible fuel breaks around communities, where we reduce the density of vegetation, forest around communities that allow firefighters to come in and make a stand protecting communities. These are major investments that we're making. The governor announced 2 weeks ago, $15 billion of our state budget this year is invested in building climate resilience and taking climate action. And we also need federal support. And that's why we're so supportive of President Biden's call for real major infrastructure investments, but climate smart infrastructure investments. So we will weather and adapt to these changes we're experiencing in real time.
Thank you, Wade. Charles, same question to you. What are those policies, projects, and maybe technologies that you're putting in place, experimenting with to deal with some of your shocks and stresses?
Yeah, I'll take a little different angle than Wade, just for the sake of diversity of the conversation. So one of the things that we keep hearing about, this all of government approach, and what does that mean, and how do you do that? And so we've really been trying to grapple with that in Louisiana. We've got this great coastal master plan that really kind of lets us see the future a little bit. We're going to lose a lot of land no matter how successful we are, and we're going to be vulnerable to hurricanes no matter what good projects get put in place. So what we've been asking is, well, how can we get everybody else to kind of recognize that as being their problem too? It's not just about the people that build the levees. So this is about the health care system, and it's about the child and family services. It's about the roads. It's all these other facets of government. And so we've been under this executive order, the governor asked us to kind of go through and figure out how to first connect everybody to that problem, and make them understand that it's their problem too. And then we've been really trying to make it concrete instead of talking about, resilience out there. We've been trying to say, okay, look, here's what we got to first take. What are the steps you have to take? So we're working through vulnerability assessments. We're working through what it means to adapt. And in some cases, it's just about trying to think 10 and 15 years into the future instead of that 1 year or 2 year budget cycle. And I think that's really difficult for a lot of us in government, at least. And so that's been a really fruitful but challenging policy area that we've been kind of working through with our different agencies. And it sounds like inside baseball. Why, who cares what state government does among state government? But it's really all about making sure that we're able to serve the people. All these agencies have a mission. All these agencies exist for a reason, and that's to provide services to the people of Louisiana. And if we're not thinking about how those needs are going to change over the next few decades, then we're going to be completely flat-footed for as these chronic stressors get worse and as these acute stressors get more frequent and more severe. So that's another thing that we're working on.
My background is in local government, both city and county in South Florida. And now this is my first kind of jump into the private sector. So I still think of myself as a local government person. And I'm curious, since you both work at that state level, what should cities and counties be doing? How do you see that relationship? And how do you maybe create a stronger bonds so that you're serving the same people at the end of the day, right? So which one wants to take that one first?
I'm glad to take a crack, Charles. And, the rubber meets the road in local government, and I would say even state government. Next month, nations around the world will come together in Scotland and talk about what nations can do working together to combat climate change and really to set targets and achieve those targets. And that's important. But I'll be honest, the work's going to get done at the state level and the city and county level. And I think sometimes in the state capitals, we can feel that, it's all about state government. But in reality, much of what we need to do on resilience is done at the local level. In a place like California, the climate threats in greater Los Angeles with 10 million people are very different than the climate threats in Sacramento or our more rural communities. So a one-size-fits-all approach simply doesn't work on climate resilience. So from our perspective at the state, one thing we're focused on is what are the funding programs that we provide to locals? And then really support that local leadership, prioritizing those multiple threats that they face. So in the case of Los Angeles, for example, Mayor Garcetti there has set some really ambitious water goals, including recycling 100% of water by 2035, which is going to build their drought resilience, but also through a strategy to capture stormwater to reduce their flooding risk. And it's our responsibility, whether that's LA or anywhere else, to make sure that they have the policy, the regulatory tools, and the funding in place to build that local resilience.
Well, I'll just say a word too about kind of supporting the local government. I just agree with everything that Wade said and even that you said, Susie, in the introduction. And so really it comes down to, just what's the appropriate role for the state in that situation. And so what we've tried to do is we can model, we can put money into modeling, we can put money into kind of like designing these really massive kind of projects, kind of the big infrastructure type stuff, whether it's green or gray, that's necessary. But then the locals are really going to have to be kind of filling in those gaps and being the ones saying like, okay, that project's great and all, but this is what we need in our community. And there it's about, kind of helping them, line up with federal and state grant opportunities. We want to be help educate them, help them, provide capacity if they don't have the capacity to apply for some new grant program and fulfill all the reporting requirements while they're responding to issues in their community. Is that something that the state can do, or can the state, find partners to help build their capacity? Not to tell them what the right project is, but to help them understand, be able to get access to these things that they can't do. So I think capacity support is going to be really important, and just as usual, just as always, just listening to what their needs are and trusting that that viewpoint as much as we can.
Absolutely. And, Wade touched upon the federal government and hopefully the infrastructure bill and supporting everything that, on the president's agenda. Charles, I'm curious as to how you're maybe thinking about that infrastructure bill or other sources of federal funding, right? They're in FEMA BRIC and other programs like that. I'm curious about, what are you doing in Louisiana getting ready potentially for this, hopefully, real, shock of funding to start addressing these things, right?
Well, we all have needs, and needs are high. And I think that yes, the federal this potential federal funding opportunity is something that we've got to be thinking about. Right now, Louisiana is really pushing hard for just emergency disaster relief. That I just can't stress that enough. That we are just even though the storm hit a month ago, it's still very, very fresh in a lot of people's minds. So we're pushing for that. We're also pushing for just making sure that we're ready in case whatever version of the infrastructure bill comes to pass. we can take advantage of it. So if it's capping methane wells, we want to be ready to go. If it's offshore wind, we want to be ready to go. All these different priorities, and I guess the to zoom out a little bit, Louisiana has spent a lot of time and effort developing these plans, and so when these opportunities do arise, whether it's from a BP oil spill or from a federal funding, we know kind of what our priorities are and what projects are going to make the most difference for our needs, and so that's been really helpful. So we're able to kind of bring this plan to whatever funding situation comes available.
I'm watching the chat here as well, and we're getting some activity from the audience, and this one's like incredibly timely. So I do want to ask both of you, if in fact, what are states going to do if we actually don't get the Build Back Better bill and the Congress doesn't come through? Are you guys thinking about that and like a plan B or I mean, that's a really good question. Wade, what do you think?
We're going to continue to lead at the state level. The fact is, we didn't stick our head in the sand for 4 years during the Trump administration when we were debating them on the existence of climate change. States were moving forward and making progress. And if you think about our energy system, our transportation systems, our water systems, those are not nationalized systems. Those are systems that exist at the state level. So we will continue to lead. But I'll say, given the scale and urgency of the climate crisis, federal leadership is essential, because while there are leading states like Louisiana, like I'd say California, we need national leadership and national resources to actually bring us all along. So, if Congress isn't able to step up on the infrastructure or the budget that the president's set forth, we're going to continue to make progress, just not as fast, not as far as if we were partnering with the federal government. Charles, I don't know if you have thoughts.
No, other than to say, I feel like, without the infrastructure bill, it's just it's business as usual. We're still trying, like Wade said, we're trying to lead. We're trying to do as much as we can with what we have. Would a shot in the arm go a long way? Would it help us meet the moment a little bit better? Of course it would, but there's plenty of work to do at the state level.
Absolutely. Both of you talked about extreme heat, right? As something that you're worried about. And I know that, that's coming up much more and even some of the work I'm doing here in Florida. And I'm curious though about how do you think about equity when it comes to extreme heat and maybe neighborhoods that can't afford air conditioning, or maybe neighborhoods that don't have that tree canopy naturally, right? Are there things that you're keeping in mind as you're developing some policies or working with the locals to deal with the question of equity?
Yeah, I've got thoughts, but Charles, sure, I'll go first.
No, Wade, please, yeah.
So I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'll mention, while these sectoral policies are really important, like our water strategy or our wildfire strategy, we're developing an overarching, actually updating our overall adaptation strategy for the state. And one of those key North Stars that's driving all of the work is prioritizing the most vulnerable communities, because we recognize that certain communities are much more vulnerable to these impacts based on their geography or wealth or lack thereof. So much of what we're focused on and really proud of is most of our investment that is actually going to those vulnerable communities. On extreme heat, there's plenty that we can do to actually reduce heats and protect people in poor communities. One obvious example is urban greening, building tree canopies in urban parts of our state that don't have them. National Geographic did a cover story this year where they identified or looked at 2 neighborhoods in greater Los Angeles, one with significant street trees and urban green space and the other without. And they found a differential in temperature of 15 or 20 degrees on certain days. And guess which community was the poor community? So I'm so glad that Charles brought up the importance and the governor of attacking extreme heat. We're a little bit much like Louisiana, where we focus more on drought and wildfire, and we're really trying to catch up on extreme heat. But certainly there are investments we can make this year, next year, on helping the communities most vulnerable to heat.
Thank you, Wade.
And just to say a few words on Louisiana's side, how we're thinking about it, we're in the midst of kind of building our climate policy from the ground up. So this is kind of a new territory for us. We've got this long history in coastal adaptation, but kind of how we go about addressing heat and how we go about reducing greenhouse gas emissions is kind of new to us. So as we're building that out, we've got an equity advisory group. We've got this real intentionality about thinking about who's bearing the burden from these changes, from these impacts, who's going to be asked to, who's going to get to benefit from all these policies that we want to put in place. And so I think that equity lens is super important. And we know that, in addition to all the things that Wade said, which we share, in Louisiana, there's also a huge energy burden on, low-income communities. They're just paying more of their income to keep their houses cool. In Louisiana, I think, hopefully everybody's got an air conditioner. I mean, we've got to have it. But if all that air is going right through the walls and outside, it's exorbitantly expensive. And so we want to think about who's benefiting and designing policies so that, solar panels and battery packs are great, but how do we make sure that the people that need them the most can kind of get them too? So it's not just for those better off individuals. And so I think it's a huge focus of ours. We're trying to collect as much data as we can to kind of make really good decisions. We're also just trying to listen to the people who are asking for this attention.
Absolutely. As you were talking, again, I go back to my experience and having worked in South Florida for so many years, and the focus of our work was climate adaptation, to be honest. And we had to, it was sea level rise, it was flooding, it was the king tides. And Wade, you're right. When these things happen, they call City Hall, right? That's what residents do. I'm curious as to how both of your states are dealing with climate adaptation and mitigation. Are you putting enough, like the same emphasis on both? How are your policies and your plans and the way you communicate? How do you balance those two? I'm just kind of curious. Maybe Charles, I'll start with you this time.
Sure, thanks. And I would just say that we have, I think our particular disaster history has put us in an adaptation posture kind of similar to you probably, Susie, in Florida. So we have really been at the forefront of that since before 2005, but Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005 really brought everything to the fore in Louisiana. And so that's when we started our coastal planning processes. This is where we started really planning for major adaptation investments. And it wasn't until last year, the beginning of the governor's second term, that we even started the process of mitigation conversation. So we are ahead of the curve on adaptation. I think it's in a lot of degrees and a lot of senses, but we are very much playing catch up, but benefiting from leadership of states like California, kind of who've already kind of sorted out some of these policies and best practices as we kind of join the mitigation game.
Yeah, we're probably the opposite, which is we're learning from states like Louisiana on adaptation. We're really proud in California. We've set and pretty ambitious climate targets 15 years ago. And, one talking point that we have that we're really proud of is we've been able, in 2007, we set a goal to reduce carbon emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. And we actually met that target 4 years early. So we talk about our economy growing at a really healthy pace while our pollution being reduced. So I think California's been even ahead of the curve on climate mitigation or reducing carbon pollution. But we treated for so long climate adaptation in California as sort of a wonky future planning exercise. It was always that back burner issue that didn't attract the attention of the policymakers, didn't get foundation funding to advance, because it was always seen as in the future. And we have science just a decade ago that suggested that what we're experiencing now, we wouldn't experience until the beginning of next century. And so accelerating climate change means that now we have to deal with these adaptation issues as a matter of life and death. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, talks about the smash mouth reality of climate change in California. So now what we need to do, and what frankly everyone needs to do, is ensure that we can't do, it's not an either or, it's not separate compartments, it's both together. And prioritizing actions that both reduce carbon pollution and build our resilience. One example I give is distributed generation. So I have friends in the Bay Area that have solar on the rooftop, they have a Tesla battery on the side of their house, and when there are these public safety power shutoffs as a result of wildfire and electricity is interrupted, that home is doing just fine powering their lives. And when there's not an emergency, they're obviously building or providing renewable energy to the grid. So more and more, we have to do both together.
You feel, I'm sorry, Charles, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just say the one example that's really quintessentially Louisiana, I think, that does the exact same thing that Wade's talking about is the blue carbon work. And so we know that, coastal ecosystems can sequester all this carbon dioxide. We need to build coastal ecosystems to provide a buffer between our communities and the Gulf of Mexico that's getting higher all the time. And so that's where we see this same synergy too. We've got to mitigate and we've got to adapt at the same time. So I just couldn't agree more with Wade. It's a great point.
I was just going to ask Wade if you're sensing like a greater sense of urgency over time amongst decision makers and the communities. Do you feel that happening?
100%. I mean, I'm 20 floors up in our building in Sacramento. For most of the summer, you could hardly see the buildings behind me because of smoke. And imagine what that does to my 7-year-old's lungs. And for weeks and weeks, we're experiencing that in California. So I think there has been, it's hard to underestimate the sea change where climate action used to be a, nice to have for a lot of residents. Now it's a have to have because it's impacting their health and their lives right now.
And so the audience is asking a lot of questions here. So I'm gonna pick one. There's a real hard one. I'll wait till the end, but let me try this one about the grid and how can the grid adapt to increased disruptions due to extreme weather? Any thoughts on that?
Well, Wade probably has more experience, but I would say that, in one of the early drafts of our climate plan, we have a first draft out, first draft ever out to the public. It just closed on Friday, but it came out right before Hurricane Ida hit, and that just really exposed just how vulnerable our grid really is to these kinds of intense hurricanes. And the microgrids looked a lot less crazy after Hurricane Ida than they did the week before, when this is not something that's really a part of the conversation a lot in Louisiana, but it's really that event really exposed the system really did fail in a major way. And so I think some of these ideas that might have been nice to have or back burner or just kinds of not priorities are all of a sudden just take on a lot more salience since then. But
couldn't agree more. And if you think about our infrastructure, whether it's water infrastructure or energy infrastructure in our country, it is, generally speaking, centralized, fairly rigid, and static. And that worked well for decades, particularly in terms of building it and reducing the cost and providing, cheap energy, cheap water. But in climate change, that's a real liability. So we need to actually make our energy system, our grid, but I'll say our water systems too, more decentralized, more dynamic, and more flexible. And I think Charles would agree that costs money, and that's a real paradigm shift. And again, for so long, it was a nice to have, or gold plating if you were a wealthy enough community to have some infrastructure investment to make. But now it's a have to have if we're really talking about protecting coastal communities from hurricane or California communities from wildfire. We have to make these investments.
That's great point. Thank you. Let me go to, you mentioned money. There's a money question here. This one's interesting. If a carbon tax is what's needed to put the Build Back Better across the line, would states support higher fuel taxes to tackle the cost of the Build Back Better bill? Taxing fossil fuels should also help, but it could be a little more controversial in some states like Louisiana and Texas. So who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll jump in and add that it's also controversial in a state like California. We have major affordability issues in our state and our country. I've been paying over $4.50 at the tank at the gas station. I'll let you know I have a plug-in hybrid, but nonetheless. And so I think we have to be really careful about how this transition impacts the cost of living across our communities. And I think if you look at France, for example, and the so-called yellow jackets movement, what you realize is there is a limit that I think residents or Californians, Americans will have in terms of how much this transition costs. So I worry about the notion of focusing on increasing the cost of fossil fuels right now at a time when so many people still depend on them. I don't want to completely dismiss the notion of a carbon tax or fuel taxes, but that would be my point of caution.
And in Louisiana, I mean, and that's not just here. I don't know what tax is popular, amongst anybody, and so it is problematic. But it's also this really great, tool to kind of start pricing things that have been, gone too long, have not had a price put on them. So we are actually talking about it. So we've had a couple of meetings on it, public meetings, just kind of really batting this around. We have a lot of industry in our state. We're 20% of the nation's refining capacity. We're just manufacturing a lot of chemicals. It's a really big part of our economy, and yet industry leaders and others in government are openly just kind of putting that idea on the table. And I think in some senses that's a good thing. Just kind of recognizing that as a policy mechanism that should be under consideration. The legislature will have a say in this, of course, and we're divided government right now, and so you can have lots of different conversations, but certain ones matter more than others. And so I think we're kind of exploring that, but I couldn't agree more that, it's not just about the tax, but it's about who's going to have to bear the burden of it. So if it's all passed on to the consumer, if it's all going back to the gas pump or in that homeowner's energy bill, that's not going to be acceptable to anybody, I don't think. So I think there's got to be a way to, if it ever comes to pass, kind of keep that price burden off of, especially low-income neighborhoods and residents, try to reinvest somehow into all these adaptation needs that we do have. We can't just create the money just to reduce folks' taxes. So hopefully we could do a little bit of everything, but it's all in the details, like everything else.
So I think we have time for one more question because our audience is very engaged. So what do you see as the biggest challenge for local and statewide governments in relation to fostering partnerships with private businesses to support building long-term climate adaptation and resilience?
I have a thought, Wade, if you mind, but I think a real challenge that we have in Louisiana, like I've been saying, we've been really out front about what our risk is since Hurricane Katrina. We put out maps every 5 years showing like where we think land's going to disappear and what we think your 100-year storm surge is going to look like. And on the one hand, we're being really transparent and we're saying like this is what the risk is, and we're picking projects to do what we can to reduce that risk. On the other hand, we're out there telling private industry and everybody else that we have risk across our state. And so then we've got local governments in there who are trying to bond out projects, whether it's just a normal bridge or whether it's a flood protection levee. There's a real interaction there that I really worry about. And so then to add on top of that, we've got other efforts that are right-minded, right, to be transparent about what flood risk is. So risk rating 2.0 coming out of the National Flood Insurance Program, we can't have people not knowing what their flood risk is, but at the same time, people can't be paying 3 times their mortgage for flood insurance every year, especially if they've kind of been living in the same house under the same conditions. So I really think the locals are really, I worry a lot about the kind of the financial markets and some of these implications for locals. So anyway, that's just a thought that I had.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, look, if you're a business, whether you're a small business or a large business, your focus is on serving the customer, creating a product, making a profit. You're not going to be experts in climate resilience. And I think we need to provide a better roadmap to all manner of businesses in the private sector around what actions are helpful to build resilience. Whether it's in facilities or in operations. I think in California, we've done a good job over time, for example, helping businesses, companies understand the importance of energy efficiency and renewable energy. And so I think if you're a big company or a medium-sized company, you kind of know what it means to reduce your carbon footprint, which of course is on the mitigation side. I think a lot of those companies would be hard pressed to know what it means to build your climate resilience or the resilience of your business or your employees to climate change. So I think we need to really catch up and create roadmaps, programs, incentives for companies to take those resilience actions like they've been taking those climate mitigation actions.
Well, it seems like we're getting close to the end of our session, but I always like to leave a little room at the end for the panelists to think about what's that final message that you want to leave the audience? What are the key messages that you want to resonate? And in this case, we've been talking about a lot of difficult issues, right? And you both have incredibly important jobs in big states, right? So, what is that message perhaps of hope or inspiration that you can leave the audience as, we're all in this business of tackling, climate shocks and stresses and building resilience. What are the last maybe two minutes each of you of that last message you want to leave the audience? Wade?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I never imagined that we would be eyeballs deep in the climate crisis like we are. And the challenges are daunting, and it is easy to be discouraged, but I actually maintain hope, and I'm energized because we're taking action. We, more than ever before, and more importantly, the people that we serve understand the stakes. Many of us, the audience here today, maybe we've been working on climate change for a couple of decades, and it used to be somewhat of a boutique policy issue, or one that, your regular friend or parent wouldn't understand. Now, I think more and more people understand what's at stake in their own lives. So we're finding that there's more urgency and accountability to actually take actions, and actions that move us further and faster to reducing pollution, stabilizing our climate, and protecting our communities and natural places. So, I think it's a terribly important time to be doing this work, and I think we have no doubt challenges like we've never experienced, but the wind at our backs in terms of taking the actions to meet, as Charles said, the moment. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And Charles, you're doing great work in Louisiana.
Thanks, Wade. It's really an honor to be here amongst people and states like yours in this issue. I think my kind of final word and little moment of hope is that I think, as funny as it sounds, if Louisiana can start having these conversations, then I think you can too. Is kind of the message I want to put out there. A year ago, just over a year ago, we went out of our way not to say the word climate change. And in just that 1 year, the governor is at the Climate Leadership Conference putting in a video. I'm on this panel. We're in the U.S. Climate Alliance, the Climate Registry. We're going to COP. We're in Race to Zero. So much that is a lot of change in just a short amount of time, and that's really inspiring. But beyond all that unilateral action that we've been able to take, this Climate Initiatives Task Force that we have has major industry representatives and environmental justice representatives at the same table at the same time. And everybody in between, kind of having this conversation and kind of working through it. And so for 10 months, we've been talking about this problem from different viewpoints, as different as they can be, and everybody's still at the table. And I'm just so heartened by that, and by the leadership that everybody's shown in this issue. And so you can feel it in every meeting that everybody there, no matter where they're coming from, is out on a limb. And it seems really fragile, but also really like something we can build on from there too. So I just hope that Louisiana, like I said, we're playing catch up in the mitigation space, but we're trying to learn from everybody that's come before us and try to really get everybody's voice included from the ground up. And we're really in it now. And I think that's exciting because from the outside, I think it seems impossible for a state like ours, but it's not. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to both of you. I know that when I was at local government, we had a network of CROs at that local level, and I hope you guys have that too. There's so much you can share and learn from each other, and it's really been a pleasure to spend some time getting to know what's happening in your states. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing everything that you're doing. Best of luck to both of you, and I want to ask the audience to thank the panelists, and now I'm going to turn it back to our host, Amy Holm. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. What an excellent conversation. Thanks, Wade and Charles, for working every day on the front lines, and Suzanne, who has spent much of her career working on climate resilience in South Florida. And fun fact, she also happened to speak at our inaugural Climate Leadership Conference 10 years ago. So thank you all for joining us here today. Now I'm thrilled to introduce EPA Administrator Michael Regan, who will be joined in conversation with his fellow North Carolina A&T alum, Ebony Thomas, from Bank of America following his remarks. And Administrator Regan, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Amy, and thank you to C2ES and the Climate Registry for inviting me to join you all today. You know, back in 2018, I spoke at this conference in Denver while serving as Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. And I'm really excited to be here again representing the Biden-Harris administration. EPA has a long history collaborating on the Climate Leadership Conference and Awards, and we're honored to be this year's government sponsor. This year marks the 10th anniversary, which is especially noteworthy. Looking back over the past decade, there have been phenomenal accomplishments in climate action. We've seen many of these accomplishments highlighted through the Climate Leadership Awards program already. It's important to celebrate those milestones that have helped transform the market, and I'm grateful to all of you for making that happen. Now, looking forward, I believe that we're at an incredible moment. President Biden has set the bar high when it comes to climate leadership. He's launched the most ambitious plan to tackle this crisis in history, cutting emissions in half by 2030. To get there, the president has adopted a whole of government approach, which means from DOD to EPA, all federal agencies are finally rowing in the same direction towards a clean energy future. I believe this whole of government approach is essential to our success, and EPA has a very important role to play in moving the ball forward. We're taking aggressive action to get our Clean Cars program back on track, to phase down the super pollutants, HFCs, and to deliver a strong proposal to reduce pollution from the oil and gas sector. When these standards are put in place, it will be a huge set of wins for the climate, as well as for healthier communities all across the U.S. But solving the climate crisis can't be done by one country or entity. It requires a global response from every level of government and every sector of the economy. It's going to take all of us. And that means it's going to take the folks in this room and corporate leaders throughout the world to ensure we get this right and that we move quickly and that we create jobs. The business community's ingenuity, creativity, and leadership on climate change are critical to our work in the days ahead. You all are raising the bar on what corporate leadership should mean and must mean in today's world. And when you factor climate change into your bottom line, you prove that the health of our economy and the health of our environment aren't mutually exclusive, but they actually go hand in hand. And that's the Biden-Harris mentality. The president's plan to build back better recognizes that climate action is one of the single best opportunities we have to strengthen our economy, to improve public health, and to better the quality of life for all people in all communities. EPA recently celebrated 30 years of voluntary climate partnership programs. We've seen that collaboration is key to success in advancing decarbonization. We've worked with tens of thousands of organizations and companies across every sector of the economy to reduce emissions, 6 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions to be exact. That's a total which exceeds all 2019 US carbon dioxide emissions. The success of these programs prove that a united approach, bringing government, business, and market forces together, can help tackle the climate crisis while also create good-paying jobs. Developing and deploying new climate-friendly technologies by working together, sharing information, and basing policies on sound science can help build back our economy stronger than ever. Building back better also requires that we use this moment of opportunity as a rising tide for our underserved and overburdened communities. For decades, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities have disproportionately borne the burden of pollution. These are the same communities that live closest to highways and refineries, who face higher rates of heart and lung disease, and whose children are more likely to develop asthma. These inequities don't just harm the communities who experience them. They harm all of us. They hold back our nation from reaching her highest ideals. They hold back our economy, and they hold back the potential for a healthier, safer, and more just future. So it's up to all of us, government, community leaders, NGOs, and the private sector. We must work together to correct these long-standing injustices. And so we need your spirit of innovation, creativity, and outsized influence to help us all meet this moment. We need your voices out there more than ever to make the case for aggressive action. We have an opportunity to harness your expertise, to expand the collective ambition, and to secure a better future for everyone. So once again, congratulations on the 10th anniversary of your conference and your awards. After a 4-year hiatus, EPA is proud to be rejoining our partners who joined us in helping to establish this critically important awards program. We have a lot of work ahead of us and so much opportunity as well. So I'm looking forward to all that we'll accomplish together by working closely together once again. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hello, Ebony. It's so great to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Administrator Regan. And thank you, Amy, for the warm introduction. And I also want to take a moment to thank our longstanding partners, C2ES, for hosting today's session and the thought leadership you bring to our organization and others in our global transition to low carbon economy. So thank you. At Bank of America, we believe everyone has a right to a healthy, sustainable, and livable environment. We're focused on this through a number of environmental and social and governance and ESG initiatives, including the commitment that I have the honor of leading, which is our $1.2 billion over 5 years to build on our longstanding work in support of driving racial equality and economic opportunity. We've already had a year into this work, and we're already starting to see some small benefits and incremental change that's happening within the communities that we live and the communities in which we serve. We've also committed $1.2 trillion in sustainable business and sustainable finance over the next 10 years, and $1 trillion of which will be directed toward low carbon sustainable business activities. We also deliver on these commitments, and we think about how our under-resourced communities that we live and we serve in are more adversely impacted, to Administrator Regan's point, by climate change and pollution. We see this in the burdens that these communities face from polluted land, water, air, lack of access, clean energy, and transportation options. Environmental justice connects the E and the S within ESG, which is critically important. At Bank of America, we're working across our firm to ensure a just transition, whether through sustainable finance, philanthropy, employee volunteerism, to ensure that additional resources can offset these negative impacts. We're also helping our clients across the globe, bringing clean energy and technologies, sustainable transportation, and other solutions to the forefront. Finally, we're working with partners to create opportunities in renewable energy and address historic patterns of pollution and people and communities of color through our work with Alternative Grid, Solar Corps, who are providing jobs and upskilling to minority communities, as well as our work with Groundswell to bring solar energy and reduce utility bills to communities of color, specifically in Washington, D.C. So with that, I want to get into it, Minister Regan, and I would be remiss if I did not say a quick Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride.
Absolutely. And, I don't think it's by accident that the university that we love so much, North Carolina A&T, which is historically Black college in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the work that I have the opportunity to lead, which is around racial equality and economic opportunity, and you being the EPA director, I don't think it's by chance or happenstance that we happen to be here today. And I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with you.
Well, Ebony, thank you for that question. And I have to agree with you that North Carolina produces some great products, and it's a great state. And so it's great to share the stage with you, a fellow Aggie. I'd like to say that my time at A&T was incredibly empowering. It set the trajectory for my career. And I don't believe that I would be where I am today without my A&T experience. I was honored to serve my home state as Secretary of the Department of Environmental Quality, and I'm bringing much of the lessons I learned in North Carolina to this role as EPA Administrator. Throughout my career, I learned that if we want to address complex challenges, we must be able to see them from all sides. We must be willing to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And that was certainly true in North Carolina, and it's true here in Washington, D.C. at EPA. As Secretary, I also had a front row seat to the importance of federal and state relationships. and what a difference transparency, respect, and open dialogue can make. State and local governments know their communities much better than the federal government ever could. So I'm bringing that understanding to my role at EPA. And I'm focused on not only building important relationships with the states, because their partnerships are critical, but with our corporate sector, our nonprofit sector. These are the places where the rubber meets the road. So rebuilding all of these relationships is a top priority for me at EPA.
And listen, as a North Carolinian, a native North Carolinian, we thank you for your service, the impact that you've had as the EPA leader here in North Carolina, and now taking that work at the national and global level. We definitely feel that impact. So we appreciate all that you do, Administrator Regan. One of the points you made earlier was we were talking about the Build Back Better agenda. And as we think about that work, and particularly the White House Justice 40 effort that connects Biden's plan to integrate climate consideration across the federal government. And you talked about moving in one solid direction. Can you tell us a little bit more about the initiative and how you think that connects specifically to that Build Back Better program?
Absolutely. This is a rising tide moment, and Justice 40 is about ensuring that the benefits of the federal government's investments are delivered to the communities who've long borne the pollution burden, our Black, our Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities. These communities that are living closest to the pollution sources, they face higher rates of heart and lung disease. Their children are more likely to develop asthma. So, EPA just released a report that shows the most severe harms from climate change fall disproportionately on underserved communities who are least able to prepare for and recover from climate-fueled disasters. Black and African Americans are 34% more likely to currently live in areas with the highest projected increase in childhood asthma diagnosis as our temperatures rise. Hispanics and Latino individuals are 43% more likely to currently live in areas with the highest projected reductions in labor hours due to extreme temperatures from climate change. So as we meet the challenges of the climate crisis, we must prioritize equity considerations in delivering economic, health, job, and environmental benefits for a cleaner economy. So that's what Justice 40 is doing, and that's how it's connected to the President's Build Back Better plan, because in the President's Build Back Better plan, it's going to be a shot in the arm to advance environmental justice, but also infrastructure investments. $50 billion alone for EPA to accelerate water infrastructure improvements, including replacing 100% of the lead pipes that are in this country. $21 billion to EPA to address longstanding pollution in communities, including $5 billion for Superfund and brownfield sites cleanup. $17 billion to tackle congestion and emissions near ports, and then another $7.5 billion in electric vehicle infrastructure, prioritizing EV charging stations in underserved communities. So there's a direct connection to these historic investments from Build Back Better to Justice 40 and all of our desire to focus on environmental justice and use it as a rising tide.
It's such a sense of urgency, not just for these communities that you've talked about, but really a sense of urgency for the entire globe. I mean, for us to address these particular issues, we address them in all communities. And so I appreciate you bringing that to everyone's attention and how that connection to that work and the Build Back Better agenda is tightly connected. So I'm in the private sector. So it's always interesting, and we'd love to hear, how do you think the private sector and the notion of this partnership between public and private, that we can really learn a lot from your agenda across the EPA, but the things that you also see across the globe. So what do you think the role between the public and private sector around your work?
There is a great opportunity for public-private partnerships for all of these efforts, and it has to be intentional. At EPA, we're looking at every single action, whether they be regulatory, permitting, enforcement, contracts, procurement. Everything is intentionally being looked at through an environmental justice lens, because we know that every decision we make will impact communities who disproportionately impacted pollution have been impacted for decades. the business community can and should do the same, because fighting injustice requires that all of us are in this together. So I think we have an obligation collectively, both public and private sector, to meet people where they are. That starts with prioritizing our engagement, meeting with the members of our communities, listening to their needs, seeing the need up close, like not sitting behind a desk, but seeing the need up close, and coming away with the real understanding of how we all deliver products to our communities. We have a responsibility to build trust in our communities that we serve and operate in. And that is just as true for government as it is for the private sector. So we have to be collaborative partners. And if we want to advance justice and be partners in the communities, then that means collectively together, as we work together, we have to show up to those city council meetings or those school board meetings, make investments in our local county hospital districts, and stand with the community as we pursue these clean energy and economic development opportunities. I think it's really powerful when the government and private sector come together, show up together, and stand up to support communities together. And so it's a matter of us just being intentional and working together.
You know, I love the words that you use there. I mean, you started out with intentional obligation, right? Is so critical and important around not only the obligation from the private sector, but from the everyday citizen, this notion of empowering individuals with information so that when they show up to these local, state, houses, that they're armed with the information and they know what they're advocating and they're fighting for. So I think the intentional nature of not only the public and private sector and the collaboration, but also arming everyday citizens with information so that they can show up and advocate on their behalf, which is so critically important. So let's stay on this theme around the private sector and kind of our role. So how can the private sector help to improve climate resilience and economic well-being of marginalized and under-resourced communities? You know, are there ways that the private sector could partner, quite honestly, with the EPA to do some of this work? So, you know, what's our role in terms of climate resilience and economic well-being within these communities, and what ways in which we can partner with the EPA and your teams?
You know, it's an excellent question. And I think there are a few things that we can do together to advance environmental justice. And one of them is to ensure that the investments in infrastructure in these communities is resilient, the investments stay in the communities, and that we're creating economic development opportunities for these communities, creating jobs and expanding access to education. You know, I was in Detroit not too long ago, and I visited Detroit immediately following a major flooding event where this supposed 1,000-year flood had just happened, 2 months after the first or the second 1,000-year flood, where the residents are primarily people of color, and they actually had wastewater flood into their basements. This is where the bipartisan infrastructure deal and Build Back Better are really important, because it's more than just protecting these people from dirty water. It's really about looking at the aging infrastructure and making investments into the infrastructure. But it's the private sector that we need to harness to help bring people to the point where the jobs match the task and we're investing in these communities, providing the investment to the community, creating the jobs, and making our infrastructure more resilient. So we're working every day to be a better partner to the communities through our regulations and policies, but we also have to be a better partner to the business community so that when we show up with these solutions, they're matched with the economic development and job opportunities as well. Our central philosophy has always been centered on collaborative problem solving, and the private sector will always be a necessary part of any kind of collaboration. So we need the private sector at the table, and by showing up together along with other government partners and stakeholders, I think the communities will see something pretty powerful that transcends partisanship. They will see action, they will see protection from pollution, but just as important, they'll see economic development and job opportunities as well.
I mean, I think that piece is so important. When you talk about the investment within the community, the work that I have the honor of leading for Bank of America is around our 1.25 billion to communities of color. And a big part of that is that investment, and a huge link to that are jobs and how we create jobs within those communities. So not just about investing in infrastructure in those communities, but then reinvesting in the people who live in those communities, so that they can then create ecosystems around themselves to be supported, and to maintain these jobs and create new ones that come into these communities. So I think that that investment, but also the investment that stays in those communities are just so critically important. So I thank you for that. So for those out there listening in the private sector, there are ways in which you can partner with the EPA, but there are ways in which you can partner with other organizations as well to make those jobs sustainable within these particular communities. I want to just switch gears a little bit too and talk to you about, what are some of the long-term efforts or projects that you're working on right now in the EPA? We've really focused right now on environmental justice and the work that's really critical and urgent in front of us. But if you could look maybe out 2 or 3 years, what do you think some of the projects or main bodies of work that you want to talk to our audience about today?
Well, I'll continue with the theme that you just started, which is it's just as much about investing in people as it is infrastructure. And so rebuilding this agency is a top priority for me. There's no doubt that we have some rebuilding to do internally. And that's true when it comes to employee morale, but it's also true when we think about how we continue to be one of the most competitive workforces on the planet. The heart and soul of EPA is its career workforce. The heart and soul of any organization is its workforce. And so public employees who do the work from one administration to the next really isn't in it for the politics. They're in it because they love what they're doing. So under my leadership, I'm really wanting to invest in the career employees, ensuring that their voices are heard, and especially the EPA career scientists and the experts. We need for them to be at the table. There were times during the previous administration or the last few years where the workforce felt distant from the mission that they signed up to do. And what we want to do is have all of our employees live the mission that they signed up for. And through that, we want to revive the workforce, which I believe we can do. And if our workforce is really invigorated, there's nothing that we can't accomplish. We do have some ambitious climate goals to fulfill. The president hasn't been shy. And, I think it's critical that we are on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we also need to think beyond them. We need to think about how our work is articulated in a way where our communities see themselves in this bright future that we're building, how people see their lives actually improving because of the work that we do at EPA. So rebuilding morale, but also making this agency more accessible to our communities and to the general public is something that we really want to focus on.
Well, 2 things, and I know I've been doing this, but I just want to double click down on 2 things that you said that I just thought were fascinating. And I don't want people to just, kind of gloss over this notion of a competitive workforce and what that competitive workforce looks like. It looks highly engaged. They look like they want to be there. They look like they are connected to the work. And that means upskilling even our current level of employees, right? In terms of how they want to continue their career to do meaningful work. And this is certainly a place in which the work that they do has a significant impact and incredibly meaningful. And not just within your organization, but across a number of organizations. That should be a vision and priority for us all. And the second thing, you talked about is, just the notion of, being mission driven career, within a particular career. And I think when I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of college students, they are really focused on having a purpose driven career, and certainly one in climate justice across the ESG spectrum is certainly one where we need those voices, we need that expertise, and quite honestly, we need that new energy of how they look at things. And so I truly appreciate those comments there. Look, in our last few minutes, I would be remiss to say we've been in a stress test for the last 18 months or so with COVID, one that we didn't necessarily pick ourselves, but we are in the midst of that stress test. And so I'd love to just know, how has the EPA, what lessons have you, your administration, learned around the impact of COVID and the approach to environmental justice? I mean, it is directly linked, but I'd love to hear your views on that impact of this test, the stress test of COVID that we've been through.
It really has been a stress test for the entire country. But COVID-19, it magnified the injustices that Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities have long faced. It showed how issues like climate change and pandemics act as a threat multiplier for our most vulnerable communities. And so addressing from our side, addressing air pollution exposure in overburdened communities is of keen interest. Really taking a look at, how we reduce the most harmful air pollutants along with greenhouse gas emissions throughout many of our rules is something that we believe will alleviate some of the stressors that we've seen. We're also looking at putting $50 million in funding under the American Rescue Plan towards more community-based projects. And we're engaging with community leaders as we prepare to make another $50 million investment in air quality monitoring. What we've really seen is now more importantly than ever, we have to reduce the burden, the health burdens that many of our communities have faced because they just can't sustain the stress test of another COVID-19. But we also have to look at the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the president's Build Back Better plan. There are billions of dollars in both of these bills in the bipartisan agenda to rebuild the infrastructure. But you made this point earlier, lots of resources in there to rebuild America and rebuild the people of America. So there are tons of investments to make our communities healthier, more resilient, get people back to work, invest in our infrastructure, and make us a more secure country. And I think that in looking at what the president's agenda is and looking at the stress test that COVID-19 presented, we see a direct correlation that the healthier we can make our communities, the more likely they are to sustain and come through these stress tests that we probably will see in the foreseeable future.
So very true. And what a good way to end us this afternoon, Administrator Regan. We appreciate your time. Once again, we want to have a great thank you to this C2ES community. Congratulations again on your 10 years. But an important conversation and excited to have it with my fellow Aggie. And Amy, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you, Administrator.
Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for your inspiring words. We really appreciate your participation.